A former military tracker explains how Bigfoot evades drones. The thermal signature on my screen was glowing bright orange, massive and unmistakable, moving through the forest 300 feet below my drone. But then it just vanished like someone flipped a switch. And I'm sitting there in the darkness staring at empty pixels thinking, what the hell just happened? They never told me I'd be hunting something that could disappear from military-grade thermal imaging without any equipment. Something that understood surveillance technology better than most humans. Something that wasn't supposed to exist, but was very much out there, watching me while I watched it. My name is Jack Mercer. I'm 52 years old, and I spent 24 years in Army Special Forces before a helicopter crash in Syria sent me home with a rebuilt shoulder and memories that don't fade with whiskey. Since 2019, I've been living in a cabin outside Packwood, Washington, doing contract tracking work for search and rescue operations and the occasional private security job. Out here in the Cascade foothills, the Douglas firs don't judge you, and the mountain silence washes away everything you'd rather forget. The elk don't ask about the scars, and the ravens don't care that you wake up sweating at 3 a.m. most nights. It was September 2023 when I got the call. I was replacing rotted deck boards on my cabin when my phone buzzed in my shirt pocket. Unknown number. I set down the hammer, wiped sawdust off my hands, and answered while lighting a Marlboro. Mr. Mercer? Professional voice? Female? No regional accent. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I'm calling on behalf of the North American Wildlife Documentation Project. Your name came highly recommended for a specialized tracking contract. I took a drag and looked at the half-finished deck. What are you tracking? I'll be direct. We're studying large primate behavior in remote wilderness regions. We have credible evidence of an unknown species in the Cascade Range. The pay is $25,000 for 2 months. We provide all equipment, including advanced surveillance technology. 25 grand was more than I made in 6 months doing rescues. I crushed out the cigarette against the deck railing. What's the catch? You sign a non-disclosure agreement, work semi-independently in the field, and you use our drone systems exclusively. We need someone who understands both wilderness terrain and military technology. You have special forces training. You know how to track in hostile environments without support. You won't quit when things get difficult. I looked around my property. Roof leak over the bedroom I'd been ignoring. Truck with 180,000 miles and a transmission that groaned in second gear. Retirement account that wouldn't last another decade at this rate. Where and when? Gifford Pinchot National Forest, Northeast Quadrant. We'll courier the contract and equipment tomorrow morning. Be ready to deploy by September 15th. Come alone. Bring your personal survival gear. She hung up without waiting for confirmation. Next morning at 8 a.m., sharp, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up my gravel drive. 2 people in tactical gear climbed out, handed me 3 hard cases through the driver's window, nodded once, and drove off without speaking. The whole interaction took maybe 30 seconds. Inside the cases was equipment I'd only seen in classified briefings during my final years in Special Forces. Military-grade reconnaissance drones, the kind that cost more than most people's houses. AI-integrated tracking software that could identify and follow heat signatures automatically. Thermal imaging systems sensitive enough to detect a rabbit's body heat from 500 feet up. Motion sensors, encrypted tablets, satellite uplink, and a contract full of legal language about confidentiality, intellectual property rights, and penalties for disclosure that made my military NDAs look casual. The target description was clinical and deliberately vague. Subject: bipedal primate. Estimated height 7 to 9 feet. Estimated weight 400 to 600 pounds. Nocturnal and crepuscular behavior patterns. Extreme evasion capabilities. Possible tool use. Undocumented species. No mention of Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Just the subject. Like they were tracking a lab specimen instead of something living in the wild. I should have walked away right then. I'd seen enough weird shit in Afghanistan and Syria to know that when wealthy people with expensive technology chase impossible targets, things usually go sideways. But bills don't pay themselves, and I'd learned in the military that sometimes you take the money and deal with the consequences later. I signed the contract in 3 places, scanned it to the provided email address, and cashed the advance check for $5,000 the same afternoon. On September 15th, I loaded my Tacoma with my standard survival loadout: canvas tent that had survived 5 winters, sleeping bag rated to -20, camp stove, 50 pounds of freeze-dried meals and energy bars, water filtration system, first aid kit stocked for emergencies, my personal AR-15 with 6 magazines, hunting knife, binoculars, GPS unit, satellite phone, and all 3 equipment cases stacked carefully in the truck bed and strapped down with cargo netting. The drive took me deep into logging roads that barely qualified as roads anymore, more like suggestions carved through mud and exposed roots and rocks that scraped my undercarriage. Johnny Cash played on the stereo while I navigated washouts and fallen trees, checking coordinates against the encrypted tablet every few miles. The deeper I went, the taller the trees grew. Old-growth forest that had never seen a chainsaw. Cedar and Douglas firs so massive that 3 people linking hands couldn't encircle the trunks. After 3 hours of 4-wheel drive grinding, the road ended at a trailhead that wasn't on any commercial map, just GPS coordinates and a small wooden post marker that looked decades old. I parked, climbed out, and stood in mountain air so clean and cold it hurt my lungs. We were at maybe 4,000 feet elevation. The forest here was dense and dark even though it was only 2 p.m. The canopy blocked most sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight. Wind moved through branches high overhead with a sound like distant ocean waves. I shouldered my pack, grabbed the equipment cases, and started hiking. The designated research camp was 5 miles up a ridge, following a game trail marked on my tablet's topo map. The trail was narrow and steep, switching back and forth through massive trees and thick undergrowth. I saw fresh elk, scat, and mountain lion tracks in the mud. This was proper wilderness. No cell coverage, no power lines, no human sounds except my boots crunching on the trail and my breathing getting heavier as elevation increased. Around 6 p.m., just as the light was starting to fade, I reached the camp coordinates. I found a small clearing with a solar-powered beacon blinking green on a metal stake. Next to it was a weatherproof storage container chained to a tree. Inside, I found additional supplies, backup batteries, weather station equipment, detailed topographic maps with red zones marked high activity areas, and a laminated instruction sheet with setup procedures. I spent the next hour setting up camp with practiced efficiency. Tent positioned for drainage and wind protection, bear bag lines strung between trees, camp stove on level ground, equipment cases opened, and inventory checked. Everything was there and functional. The drones were beautiful pieces of engineering. Almost silent rotors, AI-stabilized flight systems, cameras that could switch between visual and thermal automatically based on lighting conditions. Range of 10 miles. Flight time of 90 minutes per battery with hot swap capability. The control tablet interface was military grade, designed for operators with tactical training. Waypoint navigation, automated patrol patterns, thermal signature recognition, motion tracking, all integrated seamlessly. I spent the rest of the evening familiarizing myself with the control system, running diagnostics, and studying the topographic maps. The red zones covered maybe 20 square miles of terrain, focused on ridge systems and creek drainages between 3,500 and 5,500 feet elevation. At 1,900 hours, with darkness settling over the forest, I launched the first drone. The electric motors spun up with barely a whisper. The drone lifted smoothly, navigation lights blinking green. I watched it climb above the canopy through the tablet's camera feed, rising into twilight sky still touched with purple and orange from sunset. I programmed a basic search pattern over the nearest red zone, a creek drainage about 2 miles north. The drone banked smoothly and headed out, flying itself while I monitored the feed. The thermal camera showed the cooling forest in shades of blue and purple. Warm spots appeared occasionally, small animals moving through undergrowth. A deer in a meadow glowed bright yellow. An owl in a snag showed as a small orange dot. 15 minutes into the flight, the thermal sensor pinged with an alert. Large heat signature detected. Bipedal locomotion pattern. Range 380 yards northeast. My pulse kicked up. First night and I'd already found something. I took manual control and maneuvered the drone toward the contact, keeping altitude at 200 feet. The thermal image resolved as I got closer. It was massive, easily 7 feet tall based on the scale reference grid. Walking upright through the trees with a gait that wasn't human, wasn't bear, wasn't anything I recognized from 2 decades of tracking humans and animals across 3 continents. The figure moved with purpose, not wandering but traveling deliberately along a game trail. "Got you," I whispered. But then the figure stopped walking, just stood completely still in the middle of the trail, and the thermal signature started to fade. Not moving away, not hiding behind something. Fading, like the heat was being absorbed or masked somehow. I watched on the screen as the bright orange silhouette dimmed to yellow, then to pale green, then vanished completely into the background thermal noise of the forest. The drone's AI lost target lock. The alert changed to contact lost. What the hell? I switched to visual camera and zoomed in on the last known position. Darkness, trees, undergrowth. Nothing moving. I brought the drone lower, down to 100 feet, and activated the spotlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating ancient trees and ferns. Empty forest. I flew a search pattern for 20 minutes, scanning with both thermal and visual. Nothing. Like the thing had evaporated. I landed the drone back at camp and immediately reviewed the footage on the larger tablet screen. The thermal recording was clear and disturbing. Massive heat signature, bipedal movement, sudden stop, then gradual fade to nothing over approximately 30 seconds. No animal I'd tracked in 30 years of military and civilian work could do that. I radioed base on the encrypted satellite channel. Mercer to base. First contact achieved. Thermal signature acquired and lost. Subject demonstrated apparent thermal reduction capability. No visual confirmation. Request guidance. Static for 5 seconds, then Dr. Chen's voice came through clear and professional. Documented, Mr. Mercer. This is consistent with previous field observations. The subjects appear capable of thermal signature reduction through unknown means. Continue surveillance. Daily reports required at 0800 hours. Base out. Wait. Thermal reduction isn't possible without equipment. How is the channel went dead? She'd cut the connection. I sat in my tent that night with the stove crackling, drinking black coffee and trying to make sense of what I'd seen. The rational part of my brain said equipment malfunction, sensor glitch, atmospheric interference. But I'd used thermal imaging in combat situations for years. I knew what malfunctions looked like. This wasn't a malfunction. This was deliberate. The subject had stopped moving when the drone approached, like it knew it was being watched. Then it had somehow masked its heat signature. I thought about Afghanistan, about Taliban fighters who'd learned to evade our drones by hiding in caves or wrapping themselves in thermal blankets or timing their movements for temperature extremes. But those were learned techniques using equipment and intelligence gathered over years of warfare. This thing was standing in open forest and disappearing from thermal without any visible equipment. The next morning I woke at 0600, made coffee, and filed my first daily report. Then I spent the day conducting reconnaissance on foot, checking the area where I'd lost contact. I found tracks, massive 5-toed impressions in soft mud near the creek. Each print was 18 inches long and 7 inches wide at the ball. The stride length was over 6 feet. Whatever had made these tracks was huge and walked upright with a gait that left clear heel strike and toe-off patterns. I took photographs, measurements, and GPS coordinates. This was my first physical evidence. Something real and massive had been exactly where my thermal contact had disappeared. That evening, I launched the drone again, same search pattern. Within 20 minutes, I had another thermal contact. Different location, maybe 3 miles east. Same behavior pattern. Large bipedal figure moving deliberately through forest. I maneuvered for visual confirmation, bringing the drone lower and activating the spotlight. The figure stopped. The thermal signature faded. Contact lost. This happened every night for the next 3 weeks. I'd launch drones at dusk and dawn when subjects were supposedly most active. I'd acquire thermal signatures, sometimes multiple contacts simultaneously. I'd attempt to close for visual confirmation, and every single time, the same result. The subject would detect the drone somehow, stop moving, and fade from thermal imaging. It wasn't random. It was systematic evasion. On day 22, I changed tactics. Instead of one drone, I launched 3 simultaneously from different directions, creating a triangulated approach from different altitudes and angles. The subjects couldn't possibly track multiple drones approaching from different vectors, I reasoned. I'd done this successfully against vehicle convoys in Syria. Basic tactical envelopment. I was wrong. At 1,830 hours, I got thermal locks on 2 large figures moving together along a ridge trail. Perfect opportunity. I sent Drone 1 in from the west at 300 feet altitude. Drone 2 from the east at 150 feet. Drone 3 descended from directly above at 500 feet, converging attack pattern. At least one drone should get visual confirmation before they could fade. The subjects stopped moving. They stood still for 3 seconds. Then one of them did something that made my hands go cold. It reached down, picked up something from the ground, looked up directly at Drone 1, and threw. I watched through Drone 1's camera as something dark arced through the twilight sky toward the lens. Rock. My brain registered half a second before impact. Then the camera feed showed an explosion of static and tumbling forest and sky before cutting to black. Jesus Christ. I pulled drones 2 and 3 back immediately, climbing to safe altitude and retreating. The subjects had already vanished from thermal by the time I regained control. That night, I reviewed the footage frame by frame. The throw had come from ground level, approximately 280 feet horizontal distance, reaching 300 feet altitude, hitting a moving target in low light conditions. The object had been visible for 3 frames, definitely a rock, probably river stone, maybe 5 to 8 pounds, based on size and trajectory. The throw wasn't lucky. It was precisely calculated. The subject had tracked the drone's movement, led the target, and made a perfect intercept. At first light, I hiked to the crash site. It took me 2 hours of bushwhacking through dense undergrowth to reach the coordinates. I found Drone 1's wreckage scattered across 50 feet of forest floor. The drone had hit a tree trunk and exploded into components. Carbon fiber pieces, shattered camera lens, bent rotor arms. 30 feet away, half buried in moss and pine needles, I found the projectile. River stone, smooth and rounded, the size of a softball. I weighed it on my pack scale, 6.3 pounds. I stood there in the forest holding that stone and thinking about the physics involved. Ground to 300 feet, over 280 horizontal feet, hitting a moving target. That required understanding of trajectory, lead time, and projectile physics. That required intelligence. I collected every piece of the destroyed drone I could find, documented everything with photographs, and hiked back to camp. That evening, I filed my report with base. Mercer to base. Drone 1 destroyed by projectile defense. Subject demonstrated tool use and advanced accuracy. This isn't evasion behavior anymore. This is active defense against surveillance. Request clarification on rules of engagement. Dr. Chen's response came through an hour later. Documented and confirmed. We're authorizing replacement equipment. Drone shipment arrives your location in 3 days via helicopter drop. Continue observations using remaining assets. Adapt your tactical approach. Do not engage subjects physically. Observation only. Base out. Observation only? This thing just shot down a $50,000 drone with a goddamn rock. Static. She'd already cut the channel. I sat by my campfire that night, watching shadows move in the darkness beyond the firelight, and realized something important. This wasn't a hunt anymore. This was a chess match, and the subjects were several moves ahead. On day 28, the replacement drone arrived via helicopter drop at dawn, lowered in a cargo net along with additional batteries and supplies. The helicopter never landed, just hovered at 100 feet, lowered the cargo, and departed immediately. The whole operation took 3 minutes. Professional and sterile. I integrated the new drone into my flight rotation and adjusted tactics again. If the subjects could detect drones by sight or sound at close range, I needed to operate from maximum range using only passive sensors. I programmed automated flight patterns that kept drones at 800 feet altitude using only thermal imaging. No visual camera, no spotlight, no close approaches, just high-altitude passive observation. It worked better, but not perfectly. I could track thermal signatures for extended periods, sometimes up to an hour, mapping movement patterns and behavior. The subjects used specific trails connecting water sources, game paths following ridge crests and creek bottoms. They moved primarily during twilight hours, dawn and dusk. They traveled in groups of 2 to 4, never alone that I observed. And they always, without exception, stayed under heavy forest canopy whenever possible, avoiding open meadows and clearings except when necessary to cross between forest sections. I documented all of this meticulously. Movement patterns, travel routes, timing, group dynamics. After a month of observation, I had more data on these subjects than anyone had ever collected. But I still didn't have clear visual confirmation, just thermal signatures and behavior patterns. On day 34, I noticed something crucial while reviewing footage. The thermal signatures were strongest when subjects crossed open areas like creeks or small clearings. Bright orange on the display, clear definition, easy tracking. But in dense forest, even when I knew subjects were present, the thermal signatures were significantly reduced, not the deliberate fade technique, just naturally weaker signals. I spent an entire day reviewing all my footage, looking for the cause. And I found it. The subjects weren't just covered in thick hair, which would provide some thermal insulation. They were covered in environmental material, mud, leaves, moss, debris clinging to their hair. Natural camouflage that significantly reduced their thermal emission signature. In one particularly clear clip, I could see mud caked across what appeared to be a shoulder and arm, at least 3 inches thick in places. The mud showed as cool blue on thermal, while the subject's core body heat showed orange underneath. The mud was acting as thermal insulation, masking the heat signature. This wasn't accidental. This was deliberate camouflage. I filed my report. Subjects demonstrating intentional thermal camouflage using environmental materials. Mud application observed reducing thermal signature by estimated 30–40%. This is learned behavior, not instinct. Request confirmation of intentionality. Dr. Chen responded within an hour, which was unusual. Her voice sounded excited for the first time since the contract started. Excellent observation, Mr. Mercer. We need visual confirmation of application behavior. Can you position for direct observation of mud use? Attempting that risks spooking them permanently. We understand the risk. But visual documentation of tool use and intentional thermal camouflage would be breakthrough evidence. Your discretion on execution, but this is priority 1. I spent the next 2 days scouting creek crossings and potential observation points, looking for locations with good visibility and concealment where I could watch without being detected. On the morning of day 37, I found a perfect spot. Natural depression in rocks overlooking a creek crossing, good sight lines about 400 yards from the obvious trail where subjects would pass. I set up before dawn with binoculars, spotting scope, and camera with telephoto lens. At 0615 hours, movement caught my eye. 2 figures emerged from the tree line on the far side of the creek. Even at 400 yards through the spotting scope, they were unmistakable. Massive, easily 7.5 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair, matted with debris. They moved with a gait that was almost human but not quite. Longer arms, broader shoulders, heads that sat forward on the spine. They reached the creek edge and stopped. Then they did something I will remember for the rest of my life. They knelt down deliberately at the water's edge, where the bank was mud and silt. And they began smearing mud on their bodies. Not randomly, methodically. One subject used both hands to scoop mud from the bank and applied it to its chest, shoulders, arms, and face, rubbing it in thoroughly. The other subject did the same, working systematically to cover as much of its body as possible with thick layers of mud. The process took maybe 5 minutes. When finished, both subjects rolled in the shallow creek water, getting completely wet, then stood and moved back into the forest, dripping and mud-covered. I had my confirmation. This wasn't instinct. This was learned behavior, passed between individuals, demonstrating both tool use and understanding of thermal imaging concepts. Or at least understanding that covering themselves with mud helped them hide from whatever was watching. I photographed everything, collected video footage, and hiked back to camp, feeling like I just documented something unprecedented. That evening, I filed my report with all the evidence attached. Intentional mud application confirmed. 2 subjects observed conducting systematic thermal camouflage application at creek crossing. Coordinated behavior indicates learned skill set. Visual documentation attached. This is unprecedented evidence of countermeasures against surveillance technology. Dr. Chen's response was immediate. Outstanding work, Mr. Mercer. This is exactly what we needed. Continued documentation. We're extending your contract 2 weeks with bonus compensation. New budget authorization approved. $15,000 additional. More money, more time in the wilderness, tracking something that was clearly smarter than anyone had anticipated. I should have been excited. Instead, I felt deeply uneasy. These weren't animals. They were people. Different, unknown, but clearly intelligent and aware. And we were hunting them with military surveillance technology while they tried desperately to stay hidden. Week 6. The weather changed dramatically. Storm system rolled in from the Pacific, dropping temperatures 15 degrees overnight and bringing heavy, sustained rainfall. The forest transformed into a cold, wet, miserable environment. Everything was dripping. Fog settled into the valleys like thick gray cotton. Visibility dropped to maybe 50 yards in the dense fog and rain. I thought the conditions would make tracking easier. Thermal signatures should stand out more against cold backgrounds. Cold air, cold ground, cold rain, anything with body heat should glow bright on thermal imaging. I was completely wrong. The subjects adapted to the weather better than my technology did. During the heaviest rainfall, I couldn't get reliable thermal locks at all. The rain created what's called thermal noise, random temperature variations across the landscape that confused the sensors. Water running down tree trunks showed as cool lines. Puddles showed as cold spots. Wet rocks had different temperatures than dry rocks. And the subjects, already using mud and wet fur for camouflage, blended perfectly into the thermal chaos. I caught occasional glimpses through visual cameras during brief breaks in the rain. Massive shapes moving through the downpour, water streaming off their bodies, but they never stopped long enough for the AI tracking to establish locks. They stayed in constant motion, using the weather as perfect cover. The storm lasted 5 days. 5 days of constant rain and fog and cold that made even my military-grade gear feel inadequate. I stayed mostly in my tent, running equipment checks and reviewing old footage, while outside the forest dripped endlessly. On day 43, during a temporary clearing, I managed to track a single subject for almost 20 minutes. It was moving along a high ridge, silhouetted occasionally against fog banks. I kept maximum distance, 900 feet altitude. No spotlight, just passive observation. The subject moved deliberately but casually, stopping occasionally to look around or examine something. At one point it bent down and picked something from the ground. examined it for several seconds, then tucked it into what looked like a natural bag or pouch made from leaves or bark. Then, it continued walking. Normal behavior, like it didn't know or didn't care that it was being watched. Then it did something that changed everything for me. It moved to the edge of a small clearing, where the fog had lifted slightly, creating a brief window of visibility, and it stopped, completely still, looking up at the sky, directly at my drone. At 900 feet altitude, in post-rain visibility, with silent electric motors and no lights, there should have been absolutely no way for it to detect the drone. The thing was a tiny dark speck against gray clouds, barely visible even to me knowing exactly where to look. But the subject looked directly at it, raised one massive arm, and pointed. My hands went cold. The gesture was deliberate and unmistakable. The subject held the pointing position for 5 full seconds, tracking the drone's slow movement across the sky. Then it lowered its arm, turned, and walked back into the forest with what I can only describe as casual confidence. The thermal signature faded within 30 seconds, gone like it had never existed. I landed the drone with hands that were actually shaking. That wasn't evasion. That wasn't camouflage. That was communication. I know you're there. I see you. I see your machines, and I'm choosing to disappear now. I radioed base immediately. Mercer to base. Subject demonstrated awareness of high-altitude drone surveillance in adverse visibility conditions. Made deliberate acknowledgement gesture. Subject pointed directly at drone from ground level at 900 feet distance. This indicates either exceptional visual acuity or detection of electronic emissions or sound frequencies outside human range. These subjects know exactly what we're doing, and they're communicating that knowledge. Long pause before Dr. Chen responded. When she did, her voice was different, more careful, more uncertain. Confirmed, Mr. Mercer. We've documented similar behavior in 2 other observation areas, Colorado and British Columbia. Different observers, same results. The subjects appear to have learned our surveillance patterns across multiple locations. They're adapting to our technology faster than we anticipated, faster than should be possible through normal learning. So what do? They're aware of us. They're actively evading and now actively communicating. What's the point of continuing if they know we're here? Another long pause. I could hear her breathing on the channel, thinking, maybe consulting with others. We're reconsidering the field protocols. Your work has been exceptional, truly breakthrough documentation. You've provided evidence that changes our understanding of these subjects completely. Stand by for further instructions. Base out. The channel went silent. I sat by my campfire that night, 8th week in the wilderness, surrounded by equipment that cost more than my house, wearing boots that had walked through 3 wars, and realized something important. We weren't going to find these subjects, not clearly, not definitively, not in a way that would satisfy scientific peer review or public skepticism, because they didn't want to be found, and they were smart enough, adaptive enough, and skilled enough to stay ahead of whatever technology we deployed. They'd beaten thermal imaging with mud camouflage. They'd beaten drones with projectile defense and evasion tactics. They'd beaten high-altitude surveillance by detecting it somehow and adapting their behavior. They'd used weather as cover. They'd demonstrated tool use, learned behavior, and teaching across individuals. And they'd done all of this without any technology of their own, just intelligence and environmental mastery developed over countless generations of avoiding humans. The next morning, I woke to find tracks circling my camp. Massive 5-toed prints in the mud, maybe 50 feet from my tent. They'd come during the night while I slept, close enough to kill me easily if they'd wanted. But they hadn't. They just walked around the perimeter, examining my camp, maybe understanding that I was alone and relatively harmless. Then they'd left. I photographed the tracks with a ruler for scale. 18 inches long, 7 inches wide, pressure patterns showing incredible weight distribution. I followed them for maybe 200 yards until they disappeared onto rocky ground that held no prints. That afternoon, I tried something different. Something I probably shouldn't have done but couldn't stop myself from doing. I took a drone to the creek crossing where I'd observed the mud application, and I left supplies there. Dried fruit, beef jerky, energy bars. Just set them on a flat rock and flew the drone away. I monitored from camp using a remote camera setup. 3 hours later, 2 subjects approached the creek. They stopped at the rock, examined the food carefully, smelled it, and eventually took it. One of them looked directly at the camera, held up the energy bar, and made what I can only describe as a nod. Thank you. Acknowledgement, then they left, vanishing into the forest like smoke. I didn't report this to Dr. Chen. It felt private somehow. A communication between me and them that didn't need documentation. On day 50, Dr. Chen radioed with new instructions. Mr. Mercer, we're concluding the field study. We need you to extract by end of week. Equipment can be left at the camp location for recovery by our team. Final payment will process upon your return and debriefing at our facility. Your work has been invaluable to our research. That's it? We're just done? Not done. Accepting reality. These subjects clearly don't want to be documented in the ways we've been attempting. They've demonstrated that in every possible way. Continuing surveillance is both unethical and ineffective at this point. We're not going to catch them because they don't want to be caught. Sometimes that needs to be respected. What about all the footage, the documentation? The evidence? It'll be analyzed thoroughly, published in restricted scientific channels. Your name will be attached as primary field observer, and you'll be credited for breakthrough behavioral documentation. You've documented behavior that rewrites our understanding of non-human intelligence and technological adaptation. But as for finding them, proving they exist definitively to the public, that's not going to happen through these methods. They're too intelligent. They've learned too much, and they're going to stay hidden. The channel went dead for what I thought was the last time. I spent my final 3 days in the wilderness, packing equipment methodically and saying goodbye to a place that had changed me. 53 days of observation, over 200 hours of drone flight time, dozens of thermal contacts, hundreds of trackway photographs, behavioral documentation that was unprecedented, and not a single clear, sustained visual confirmation that would satisfy scientific standards or convince public skepticism. The subjects had evaded everything. They'd outmaneuvered military technology designed to track terrorists across continents. They'd adapted to surveillance faster than we could modify our tactics. They'd won this chess match decisively. On my last night in camp, I sat by the fire thinking about what it all meant. Somewhere in these mountains, something existed that humanity had been seeking for generations. Something smart enough to understand that humans with technology were dangerous. Something sophisticated enough to develop and teach counter-surveillance techniques. Something that had probably been doing this for hundreds or thousands of years, learning from each encounter, adapting, surviving, while we hunted them with increasingly advanced tools. Around midnight, I heard something in the darkness beyond the firelight. Not threatening, not close, just present. The sound of something large moving carefully through undergrowth, stopping, waiting. I stood up slowly, hands visible and empty, and spoke to the darkness. I'm leaving tomorrow. First light. I won't tell anyone where you are. The footage goes to researchers, but I'll make sure they understand. You don't want to be found. You've made that incredibly clear. That should be respected. You've earned that. The forest was completely silent for maybe 30 seconds. Wind had stopped. Even the creek seemed quieter. Then I heard it. A low rumble, almost below the threshold of human hearing, vibrating through the trees and the ground and my chest. Deep and resonant like distant thunder or a massive animal's vocalization. It lasted 5 seconds. Then another sound, higher pitched, almost like a question. Then silence again. Acknowledgement? Gratitude maybe? Goodbye? I sat back down and stared into the fire until dawn, thinking about all the things I'd seen and learned. about intelligence that existed outside human frameworks, about adaptation and survival, about the right to remain hidden. The next morning, I broke camp with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 10,000 times in a dozen different countries. Tent collapsed and rolled, sleeping bags stuffed, equipment cases sealed and staged for the recovery team. I scattered the fire pit ashes and covered the area with pine needles until no trace remained of my presence. Leave no trace, the wilderness ethic, and also good operational security. Before I left, I walked to the creek crossing one last time. I left more food on the same flat rock, and I left a note, handwritten on waterproof paper. You win. Stay hidden. Stay safe. The world isn't ready for you anyway. J.M. The hike out took 6 hours. My truck was exactly where I'd left it, covered in 7 weeks of pine needles and dust, but otherwise undisturbed. I loaded my personal gear, left the equipment cases stacked neatly for recovery, and started the long drive back to civilization. The drive back felt surreal, like leaving one reality and entering a completely different one. The first paved road seemed foreign and artificial. The first building strange and unnecessary. The first other human I saw, a logger in a pickup who waved as we passed, looked at me like I was wild. Maybe I was. 3 days later, I delivered myself to Dr. Chen's research facility outside Seattle. The building looked like any corporate office park, all glass and steel and landscaped grounds. Nothing about it suggested what they studied. I was escorted to a conference room where Dr. Chen and 3 other researchers waited. I handed over the final documentation, the memory cards and hard drives I'd kept with me, and spent 6 hours in debriefing. They asked detailed questions about every observation, every contact, every behavioral pattern I'd noted. They were particularly interested in the mud application and the pointing gesture. "You're certain the gesture was directed at the drone specifically?" one researcher asked. "Absolutely certain." The subject tracked the drone's movement and pointed directly at it. That wasn't random. That was communication. Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "We're seeing this across multiple observation sites now. Colorado, British Columbia, Northern California. The subjects are becoming aware of drone surveillance and adapting their behavior in response. In Colorado, they've started using caves exclusively during daylight hours. In British Columbia, they're relocating to areas with denser canopy. They're learning faster than we anticipated." "They're learning because they're intelligent," I said. "Not animal intelligence. Human level or beyond. That's what the evidence shows." The room was quiet for a moment. Then one of the researchers, older man with gray hair, spoke carefully. "That's the conclusion we're reaching as well, which creates significant ethical problems for continuing research." "Good," I said. "There should be ethical problems with hunting intelligent beings with military technology." Dr. Chen gave me a look that was hard to read. Respect, maybe, or resignation. "Your contract is complete, Mr. Mercer. Final payment includes the extension bonus and an additional consultation fee. Total of $43,000. The funds will transfer within 24 hours. They gave me more papers to sign. More NDAs with stricter language. Acknowledgement that I'd face legal consequences if I disclosed anything publicly. I signed them all without reading closely. I'd kept secrets for the government for 24 years. I could keep these. The money cleared my account the next day. $43,000. I paid off my truck completely, fixed my roof properly, bought a new hunting rifle I didn't need, and a fishing rod I'd actually use. Deposited the rest in savings and tried to figure out what to do with myself. I never signed another tracking contract after that. But the story doesn't end there, because 6 months later, Dr. Chen contacted me again. "Mr. Mercer, I'm calling personally, not officially. What we discussed isn't for any record." "I'm listening." "The project has been shut down. All field operations discontinued. The funding sources made the decision after reviewing all documentation from all sites. The conclusion was that these subjects demonstrate human-level intelligence and therefore surveillance constitutes an ethical violation. We're destroying all equipment and sealing the files." That's the right decision. I agree. But there's something else. Something that happened after you left your field site. The recovery team found your note, and they found a response. My chest tightened. What kind of response? Rocks arranged in a pattern. 7 rocks in a specific formation that our anthropologist identified as a universal symbol for safe journey or goodbye, found in multiple indigenous cultures. They responded to you, Mr. Mercer. They understood your note and responded in a way they knew humans would understand. I sat down heavily. What does that mean? It means you were right. They're not just intelligent. They understand us. They understand our languages, our symbols, our intentions, and they're choosing to remain hidden anyway. The question is what we do with that knowledge. We respect it, I said. We leave them alone. We let them have their mountains and their privacy. That's what we do. I agree. But others will keep looking. Private companies, wealthy individuals, governments. The search won't stop. Then we don't give them anything to find. You seal those files. You destroy the data. You make sure no one else can use what we learned to hunt them. Long silence. Then, already done. Every hard drive wiped. Every document shredded. As far as official records show, the project found nothing conclusive. Just ambiguous thermal data and unclear footage. Nothing that would justify continued searching. Good, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mercer, for understanding what this really meant. Most people in your position would have tried to capitalize on the discovery. Instead, you protected them. She hung up. That was 8 months ago. Now I'm back in my cabin full-time, living on savings and occasional hunting guide work. I fixed up the rest of my property, built a new deck, replaced the windows, made the place properly weatherproof for the first time in years. People ask me sometimes if I believe in Bigfoot, usually in bars or at hunting camps when the beer is flowing and stories get strange. I tell them, belief is the wrong word. I don't believe. I know. I know something exists in those mountains. Something massive and bipedal and intelligent. Something that understands human language enough to write responses. Something that has learned to evade every technology we develop. Something that teaches its young how to defeat thermal imaging with mud and how to track drones by sight or sound or electromagnetic emissions. Something that has survived while humans drove almost every other large mammal to near extinction. And I know they're going to stay hidden. Not because they're lucky or because we're incompetent. Because they're smarter than us about the things that matter. About survival. About adaptation. About knowing when to hide and when to communicate. While we build increasingly sophisticated technology to find them, they've perfected something more powerful. The ability to remain invisible by understanding their environment better than we ever could. Sometimes I drive back toward those mountains, park at old trailheads, hike a few miles in, just listen to the forest. And sometimes, if I'm quiet and patient and respectful, I hear things, breaking branches in patterns that don't match any animal I know. Low vocalizations that resonate in your chest. The feeling of being watched by something intelligent and curious, but also cautious. Last month, a researcher from a different organization contacted me by email. Subject line: Breakthrough Quantum Thermal Technology, Interest in Field Contract, 6-figure compensation. I read the first paragraph. New quantum-based thermal imaging that supposedly couldn't be defeated by any conventional camouflage. AI predictive tracking that learned faster than subjects could adapt. Drone swarms that could blanket 50 square miles simultaneously with coordinated search patterns. They wanted me to test it in the field. I deleted the email without responding. Some things aren't meant to be caught. Some beings have earned the right to their secrets through intelligence and adaptation and sheer determination to survive against impossible odds. And after 53 days learning how Bigfoot evades drones, I learned something more important than any scientific documentation could prove. They don't evade because they're lucky, or because we're incompetent, or because our technology has limitations. They evade because they're smarter than us about wilderness survival, because they belong to those mountains in a way we never will. Because every time we develop a new technology to find them, they're already adapting to it, learning its patterns, finding its weaknesses, teaching each other how to stay hidden. And honestly, I hope they stay hidden forever. I hope they keep teaching their children how to detect drones and defeat thermal imaging. I hope they keep using mud and weather and darkness and intelligence to remain invisible. Because the alternative is what we do to everything else we discover. We study it, catalog it, monetize it, put it in zoos or on television or in research facilities, destroy its habitat to build roads for easier access, drive it toward extinction while claiming we're protecting it. The mountains keep secrets. Some of those secrets are sacred, and some secrets deserve to be kept forever. If you ever find yourself in deep wilderness with the latest tracking equipment, thinking you'll be the one to finally capture definitive proof, remember this story. Remember that they're watching you right now. They're learning your patterns. They're adapting to your technology faster than you can modify it. And when you finally think you have them cornered, when your thermal imaging locks on and your drones converge and you're certain this is the moment, they'll already be gone. Faded into the background, disappeared like smoke, like shadows, like they were never there at all. That's how Bigfoot evades drones, not through magic or supernatural abilities, through intelligence, through adaptation, through environmental mastery, through 1,000 generations of staying hidden from the species that tried to destroy everything else in its path. The return, but there's more to this story. Something I haven't told anyone until now. 3 months ago, I was guiding a hunting party in a different section of the Cascades, maybe 40 miles from my original observation site. We were tracking elk through dense timber when I found something that made my blood run cold. A small clearing with 7 rocks arranged in a specific pattern, the same pattern Dr. Chen had described. Safe journey, goodbye. But this time there was something else. Scratched into the bark of a nearby Douglas fir, maybe 8 feet up where a human would need a ladder to reach, were marks. Deliberate parallel lines forming a simple image. A human figure. And next to it, a larger figure with proportions that matched the subjects I'd observed, standing together. I sent the hunting party ahead and stood there alone, looking at that image carved into ancient bark. They'd left me another message. After all these months, in a completely different location, they were telling me they remembered. They were telling me the connection was real. I took one photograph for myself. Then I used my knife to carefully shave off the bark section, removing the evidence completely. Let them keep their secrets. That night in camp, one of the hunters asked me if I'd ever seen anything strange in these mountains. Big animals. Unusual tracks. The question everyone asks eventually. I looked at the fire and thought about how to answer. These mountains are full of strange things, I said carefully. Most of them want to stay that way. Strange and undiscovered. I respect that. No more eye graft, the hunter laughed. Come on, Mercer. You spent months out here alone. You must have seen something weird. I saw that the wilderness is bigger and smarter than we give it credit for. That's all anyone needs to know. He didn't push further. But later that night, after everyone was asleep, I heard something moving through the timber beyond our camp. Heavy footsteps. Deliberate. Circling at maybe 100 yards distance. Watching. Protecting maybe. Or just curious. I lay in my sleeping bag listening to those footsteps and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Real peace. Knowing that something out there was intelligent enough to survive human expansion, smart enough to adapt to our technology, and wise enough to choose isolation over discovery. The footsteps eventually faded into the distance. In the morning, I found tracks at the perimeter. 18 inches long. The same subject, or one of its family. Close enough to destroy our camp if it wanted. But it hadn't. Just walked the perimeter and left. The conference. Last week I got a call from Dr. Chen again. This time it was an invitation. There's a private conference. Small group. 10 researchers from different fields. Anthropology, primatology, AI ethics, conservation biology. We're discussing the implications of what we found, what it means for our understanding of intelligence and rights and conservation. I'd like you to present the field observations. No recording, no publication, just honest discussion among people who understand the implications. Why me? You have the data, because you connected with them in a way none of us did. You understood what it meant. We need that perspective. I thought about it for 2 days. Then I agreed. The conference was held at a remote retreat center in the Oregon Cascades. 10 brilliant people, all of whom had encountered evidence of the subjects through different channels. A primatologist who'd analyzed hair samples showing unknown DNA. An anthropologist who'd studied footprint casts from 6 different states. A conservation biologist who'd mapped habitat ranges. An AI researcher who'd studied the footage trying to model their learning capabilities. We spent 3 days sharing information that officially didn't exist. By the end, the conclusions were undeniable. These subjects represented an unknown species of human-level intelligence. They numbered maybe several hundred across North America. They had language, culture, tool use, teaching, and adaptation capabilities that rivaled or exceeded human abilities in certain areas. And they had systematically avoided human contact while living in our immediate proximity. The question, Dr. Chen said on the final day, is what we do with this knowledge. Do we have an obligation to science, to truth, to the public? The anthropologist, a woman named Dr. Martinez, spoke carefully. We have an obligation to them first. They're clearly intelligent. They clearly want to be left alone. Forcing contact or public disclosure would violate their autonomy, their consent. But think about what we could learn, another researcher argued. Language, culture, evolution, the implications for our understanding of intelligence alone. At what cost? I interrupted. Everyone turned to look at me. You want to study them? Fine. That means capture or sustained observation against their will. It means habitat disruption. It means eventually they get tracked down by less ethical people who'll exploit them. It means the end of their isolation and probably their way of life. Is your curiosity worth that? Silence in the room. Mr. Mercer is right, Dr. Chen said quietly. Our curiosity, however scientifically valuable, doesn't supersede their right to autonomy. If they're intelligent beings, and all evidence suggests they are, then they have the right to choose isolation. We have to respect that choice. By the end of the conference, we'd reached consensus. The information would stay restricted. No public disclosure. No further field studies without explicit evidence of subject consent, which seemed unlikely. The data we'd collected would be archived but sealed, available only to researchers who agreed to ethical guidelines that prioritized subject autonomy. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than the alternative. As I was leaving, Dr. Martinez pulled me aside. You did the right thing out there, feeding them, leaving the note, treating them as equals. That's what changed this from a hunt to a dialogue. They were always equals, I said. We just had to stop long enough to notice. Present day. Now I'm back at my cabin again. It's December. Snow is starting to fall in the high country. The subjects will be moving to lower elevations soon, following their winter patterns. Patterns I help document. Patterns that will stay sealed in archives where they can't be used for hunting. I built a new workshop this fall. Started woodworking again, something I'd given up decades ago. Made a rocking chair from cedar. I milled myself. It sits on my new deck, facing the mountains. I sit there most evenings with coffee, watching the sunset behind peaks that hold secrets. Sometimes I think about going back out there, hiking into those red zones with no equipment, no drones, no cameras, just me and my pack, and the intention to exist in their space respectfully, to see if they'd approach, to see if real communication might be possible between two intelligent species choosing contact instead of one forcing it on the other. But I don't. Because that would be for me, not for them. My curiosity, my desire for connection. And I've learned that sometimes the most respectful thing you can do is leave someone alone when they've made it clear that's what they want. The military taught me how to track and hunt. The subjects taught me when not to. That's the more valuable lesson. People still ask if I believe in Bigfoot. I've stopped answering. Belief doesn't matter. What matters is respect for intelligence, for autonomy, for the right to remain hidden in a world that wants to document and catalog and monetize everything. They're out there, right now, in those mountains and countless others across the continent, using mud and weather and darkness and intelligence to stay invisible, teaching their children the same skills, surviving despite everything we've done to make survival impossible for species we don't understand. And they're going to stay out there, hidden, free, safe, because some mysteries deserve to stay mysterious. Some beings have earned the right to their secrets, and some technologies, no matter how advanced, will always be defeated by intelligence and adaptation and the simple determination to remain unknown. That's how Bigfoot evades drones. That's how they've evaded us for generations. And that's how they'll keep evading us for generations to come. Let them. The mountains are big enough for all of us. We just have to be wise enough to share them on terms that respect everyone's right to exist, human and non-human alike. I take another sip of coffee and watch darkness settle over the peaks. Somewhere up there, they're watching the same sunset, living their lives, surviving, thriving even. And that's exactly how it should be.